it says I have to start. So maybe. Yeah. So I hope. Good evening. Hope everyone can hear me okay. So that's my great pleasure to welcome you, the Royal City of Edinburgh, this evening for our curious talk. The first thing we're going to have to do is a bit of housekeeping, which I think is going to come up on the screen. We're not expecting a fire drill today, so if we hear fire alarm, we'll have to just follow the signs, and we have to get out and gather outside the dome. So I think the information was meant to be coming up, but never mind. Hope this is clear. The other thing I need to tell you is that we're live streaming today, so be aware of this when you're asking questions and interacting. And so this evening what we're going to do is Professor Anderson will give his talk, and I'm going to give you detail in a minute for about a half hour, 45 minutes, and then you'll have opportunity to ask questions and we can have a conversation together. So, and this is now I'm going to be doing a bit of reading because I haven't learned all this by heart. Apologies, Andy. So Professor Andy Sloan, Managing Director of Coire UK. Andy is Managing Director of the consulting firm Coire UK and is a visiting professor in the Department of Civil Engineering at Strathclyde University, where in fact, the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering at Strathclyde University, where I worked for a while. An engineering geologist by training through the University of Edinburgh and Leeds. He's a chartered engineer and a fellow of the Institution of Civil Engineers. He works on the fields of infrastructure development and renewable energy. His area of specialization is in the development of underground space, having worked on some of the world's largest tunnels and cavern projects around the world for infrastructure development, mining, science, water and power, including the large project on pump hydro storage that we will talk about today. So just briefly, not to say too much, but in the talk this evening, you'll learn about the latest developments in energy storage solution and explore the trajectory of Scotland's energy storage industry. The relationship between the green transition and the socio-political development of Scotland will be discussed, and you will hear about how we can harness the engineering legacy of hydro and the power of the Glens. I think that's very exciting.
Thank you. So when you're reading that out, I seem to have a lot to cover. And I'm looking enviously at you all with fans as well. It's quite warm in here. So thank you very much for coming along. And what I'm going to chat to you about tonight is Scotland's potential place in green transition with a particular focus on energy storage and just quite how important that is to us as a society and the potential benefits for Scotland and the wider UK setting. So, I mean, I don't have to tell a curious and enlightened audience at the RSC that the climate change is with us, climate heating is with us, and in July this year, according to the EU's climate change body, was the hottest July ever in record and probably ever. The global average temperature was 17 degrees, the hottest on record, and we've seen extraordinary fires and temperatures in Japan, Southern Europe, North America, and fires burning in roads and Canada with real detrimental impact on life. The United Nations General Secretary said in July this year that climate change was out of control. The heating is changing the ocean currents and leading to unprecedented weather patterns that are having a huge detrimental impact on us all. So the Scottish Government went to consultation earlier this year with its route map to secure Scotland's as fast as possible transition away from fossil fuels. The draft Energy and Just Transition Plan sets out the vision for Scotland's energy future. And this is really looking at the legal requirement to get to net zero in Scotland by 2045. It includes a just transition plan focused on growing Scotland's highly skilled energy workforce and increase jobs in the energy sector in the UK. There are three overarching objectives to this draft strategy: scale up renewable energy production, secure continued and increase the investment in this sector in Scotland, and deliver a fairer and securer energy system. And that last tenet has become extremely important given the insecurity that's apparent in our energy storage system given the war in Ukraine. However, late last year, the Committee on Climate Change, the chairman of that, used to be known as Selman Gummer, stated that Scotland's climate targets are in danger of becoming meaningless and that Scotland's lead in decarbonising over the rest of the UK was all but lost. So we had a great start, and the Climate Change Committee is saying that we are somewhat falling back. Royal Society in Edinburgh, in reply to the consultation earlier this summer, noted that there was a gap between reality and ambition, and that detailed roadmaps for the delivery of the Scottish Government's plans needed to be developed. Just in simple terms, it's a call for more joined up thinking in terms of what Scotland is doing towards the green transition. Oh, that's how to get out if there's a fire. So offshore wind is central to what we're doing in Scotland, to our plans on decarbonising energy and society. The government has aspirations in the UK for 50 gigawatts of electricity from offshore wind by 2030, and the Scottish Government has an aspiration of 20 gigawatts, and that's a combination of offshore and onshore wind development. Now, these are super ambitious plans and leading the world in terms of their ambition. And actually, if you look at the first 3 months of 2023, the majority of the electricity generated in the UK was from offshore wind. So we're on the right trajectory. But by 2050, we anticipated that we'll need twice as much electricity as we generate now as we move to a more electrified way of living. But wind can be intermittent. It doesn't blow all the time. At present, this shortfall when wind stops is generated by switching and bringing online gas-fired power stations. So in the future, we were going to have to rely more and more on stored energy. Our current capacity to store renewable sourced energy is less than 1% of what's required. Our overall capacity to store energy is really quite abysmal, and you can see what happened with the war in Ukraine and the accelerated cost of gas. That's all to do with a lack of storage. That's the fossil fuel storage. Our renewable capacity for storage is even less. In addition to this, electricity produced by wind sometimes exceeds what the grid can actually handle. So we might be in the south of England and needing electricity. We have a surfeit of electricity generated in our wind farms in Scotland, but the grid cannot get the electricity to the south of England or where it's required. So in those times, the energy is curtailed. And what happens then is the wind farm producers are paid to a fee because they cannot generate electricity. And in parallel with that, we switch on gas-fired power stations. So not only are we paying curtailment costs, but we're increasing our CO2 emissions by firing up gas-fired power stations. So to give you an idea, wind generation equivalent of 2% of the electricity total demand was curtailed on the GB grid between 2020 and 2021, and 88% of it came from Scottish wind farms. The cost of that in 2010 was £170 million a year. 21, that was 1.3 billion in curtailment costs that we are all paying in our electricity bills because we can't move the electricity around the grid. Some estimates put the potential bill up at 2.5 billion in curtailment costs. So you can see that with the limitations on the grid, this curtailed energy cost, and just the fact that we're losing valuable energy, the increased electrification of our society as we move forward to 2045 and 2050, and the potential to make large amounts of renewable energy from offshore wind, the need for storage is absolutely paramount, and we need to do it quickly. Energy storage systems solve this problem by storing surplus energy and making it available at later times when we need it. Electricity can be taken from stored energy and fed back into the grid. And as we scale up our offshore wind power production, we need to scale up our ability to store the energy that we create. So the question is, can Scotland become a storage superpower? There are many technologies at play in this area, and I'm just going to concentrate on a couple that our business is involved in. I'm not going to cover the whole gamut here. So the time is right to tap into hydrogen's potential to play a key role in energy storage. This technology is emerging as one of the leading options for storing energy from renewables. The main issue for me in this regard is that we are quite quickly falling behind our neighbours, particularly compared to both Denmark and Germany. So green hydrogen is made by electrolysing water, splitting the water molecule into oxygen and hydrogen, and critically using renewable energy. So that's green hydrogen, as opposed to blue hydrogen, which is derived from methane with associated carbon capture. And you'll hear much talk in the UK about low carbon hydrogen. That is hydrogen and green hydrogen and blue hydrogen. But blue hydrogen is not pure renewable sourced. So hydrogen production aspirations in Scotland published by the government are to 5 gigawatts capacity by 2035. That's a substantial amount, increasing to 25 gigawatts by 2045. And this is not just green, it's green and blue. So when you hear these numbers, remember to challenge them. And the aspirations of Scottish Government is to become a net exporter of green hydrogen, actually, the electrolyzed hydrogen. So Scotland is in a great position to develop and exploit the potential for green hydrogen. We've got plentiful wind opportunities. We've got plentiful fresh water, because lots of countries where they're talking about green hydrogen, North Africa, etc., they are limited by the availability of fresh water, where we're over-endowed with the stuff. The RSC's position on the consultation with the Scottish Government was that both governments should focus on green hydrogen, but accept that blue hydrogen, in terms of we've got a lot of natural gas, should be considered as a bridge to a green hydrogen future. And that's really given us time to get the electrolysis scaled up to the size that we would want it. So green hydrogen has a role in mitigating the curtailment costs that I talked about, but its real benefit is much wider. In fact, it featured in a number of the main initiatives that come out of COP26 in Glasgow. Green hydrogen-based fuels such as ammonia, green methanol and green ethanol store renewable energy and allow us to use that energy at a later point in time. It can be transported over long distances from regions of abundant energy like Scotland to energy-hungry areas, perhaps thousands of kilometres away. So it's a very versatile fuel. The potential interconnectivity of a hydrogen economy is shown on this cartoon, with renewable energy sourced from wind connected to various off-takers through electrolysis into society. The process of reaching a hydrogen economy will be achieved to a large part by a process called sector coupling. And this sector coupling attaches and attracts energy producers to energy users in terms of hubs, and that is using hydrogen locally. In effect, these sectors are coupled via green hydrogen and green fuels. And by coupling these different sectors of the economy, we have the opportunity to start looking at decarbonising hard-to-abate areas in society, and that is things like shipping, heating, heavy transportation. As an example of just the rate of change in this space and the investment that is now being poured into it, just what is being achieved and just maybe how far Scotland is behind. The port of Esbjerg in Denmark is its largest port, annual cargo of 4.3 million tonnes, 6,000 ships, so it's a substantial port. There was a meeting there with President of the European Commission, Chancellor of Germany, Prime Ministers of Belgium, Denmark, Holland. They all signed a joint declaration to look collectively at what energy could be produced from wind in around their coastlines and feed it through the port of Esbjerg and focus that as a hub. So they pledged to expand the renewable energy there by some tenfold in terms of offshore wind. And what has just been announced, for example, is that Esbjerg is receiving a €1 billion investment on a 1 gigawatt green hydrogen facility. And that's money coming from Switzerland to be invested in Denmark, specifically to get 1 gigawatt. So that's 20% of Scotland's target by 2030. So we're fortunate at COVID that we're helping in that early generation of this huge, it's the world's biggest green hydrogen plant. I'm very pleased that the Energy Minister for Scotland is going over to Esbjerg next week on a fact-finding mission, and I suspect that she will have a lot of facts to find out. There's clearly a deal of catching up to do between us and them. But remember, we have a huge amount of potential in terms of our renewable energy sources. So it's a matter of looking at other countries and saying, that's where we need to be. Let's get on with it. Another fascinating area in sector coupling is ships. So in Denmark, again, they set up public-private partnerships looking at 14 areas of their economy, and they put in CEOs of major industries and government policymakers, and this covered areas such as aviation, the construction sector, defence, energy, etc. And the idea was to come up with joint policy approach to each one of the sectors of the Danish economy and come up with real roadmaps to the decarbonisation of the economy. So policies directly related to the ambitions and the achievement that what could be achieved by industry. So Maersk, for example, it's a logistics company. You'll have seen the containers with Maersk written on the side. So they're about to start receiving a fleet of ships that are methanol empowered, so they can run on green methanol. So Maersk is an interesting organisation. Its fuel bill, the amount of fuel it uses, in 1 year, it uses 1 day of the entire global production of oil. So they are very, very keen to drive down their carbon footprint. We met the CEO recently, and he's completely, ex-CEO, and completely focused on this journey, 25% reduction by 2030, and then on to carbon neutrality by, I think it's 2040 or 2050. The interesting bit and the bravery in this is they don't have the fuel for the ships that they've ordered. So they have ordered, I think it's 12 or 14 ships. They don't have the fuel for them, but they are generating the market. So they're saying, I've got a ship, 14 ships, or whatever, you come and fill them with green methanol and we'll buy the methanol. So they announced just recently that they have secured enough green methanol for a maiden voyage of one of their first ship, and that is from Korea to Copenhagen in the coming months. So that is, they're generating an industry to support their decarbonisation journey by sector coupling and driving that down. Another area closer to home is a project that's very close to my heart is Lower Thames Crossing. It's in the Thames. It's new highway construction. Civil engineering sector is very hard to abate to try and get the carbon out. But energy storage can help in this. So LTC is a brand new road that's hoped to connect Essex and Kent underneath the Thames estuary. Hope to be completed by 2029, and it will be the UK's longest road tunnels, the third largest tunnel boring machines in the world, the largest we've ever had in the UK. 2.6 miles of tunnel, 14 miles of road, 50 bridges, etc. So lots of concrete, lots of digging, lots of carbon. But what National Highways have done here is quite unique. They have we benchmarked the amount of carbon that was going to be produced from this project, and they are actively going through the procurement process now, and they will incentivise the contracting entities who come to build it with real money to drive the carbon down. So they are creating a market now, as we speak, in terms of green fuel development along the Thames estuary to create the market to decarbonise this piece of infrastructure. Now, this is a real pathfinder project within the UK, and I certainly think that in Scotland we should be looking at this sort of approach to decarbonise our infrastructure. Some real lessons to be learned. The draft strategy acknowledges, sort of tips its hat to the potential for hydroelectric pump storage, long-term pump storage, to play a significantly greater role in our transition, providing flexible security, resilience to our energy systems, and it's a very efficient system, and it's proven. So how does pump storage work? Well, there's two bodies of water, and in times of low energy demand, so we've got surplus of energy, or energy prices are low, you pump water up to an upper reservoir, and in times of when we need energy, the water goes through turbines, creates hydroelectricity, and is fed back into the grid. So in effect, it's a large battery. It's a highly efficient way of storing electricity. So there are two schemes in Scotland progressing at real pace. There's Scottish and Southern Energy's Coire Glas pumped storage hydro project, which is set to double the UK's storage capacity when it opens. And it's progressing well through its development. This also, you're all probably aware of the Kruger power station on the west coast. Well, Drax, the owner of Kruger, is moving at pace with Kruger 2, which is another pump storage scheme in beside Kruger 1. Now, so there's a big movement for pump storage in Scotland. This is tempered policymakers, and this is a UK government, and it's been put under pressure, quite rightly so, because the people who want to release this investment and spend on these schemes, they're not through the final investment decision yet, and it's all about the price that they can charge for storing electricity. So they're looking for a cap and a floor, a ceiling and a floor price on the energy that they can store for us and for society. And I know the First Minister's written to Prime Minister to urge him to create and come out with what these values are. So Scotland has a very long history in hydroelectric. As you drive around our country, you cannot fail to see the dramatic infrastructure that snakes around our glens, the power stations and the dams. The starting point for this development was after the First World War, which we won, but it was almost a Pyrrhic victory because the UK or Britain was in such a desperate state. It took a huge toll on the country. Lloyd George's government recognised that Britain's electricity system was backward. It lagged way behind the US and Germany, where the production of electricity per head far exceeded that of Britain. The government then recognised that the transformation required to improve the economy, to improve jobs and the life of our countrymen really needed to increase electricity production. So engineering and scientific adjustment had to be made and made quickly, and it was essential for survival. This led to fairly short order to the development of the national grid, and by the time the Second World War came along, we had an operable national grid, and that became a vital part of the defence in World War II. But as we trundled through World War II, in 1942, Churchill set up a Council of State for Scotland, comprising the living Secretaries of State for Scotland, and charged them with considering the future of Scotland and rebuilding Scotland after the war. And he said he would look favourably if any unanimous recommendation was made from these Secretaries of State. In very short order, the committee established a subcommittee to look at the potential for hydroelectric development in Scotland, particularly the north, and they reported back very favourably. And in 1943, the Hydroelectric Development Scotland Act led to the establishment of the North of Scotland Hydroelectricity Board, and that is the precursor to SSE today. That was formed in August 1943, so they're celebrating 80 years of the Hydro Board last month. And if you go to the National Storytelling Institute Centre, thank you so much, in Edinburgh, there's a wonderful display that opened today, all about the original paintings. I mean, so it's well worth going. So the scale of the investment, SSE's fleet of stuff built in just shortly after World War II, 78 power stations, 8,700 kilometres squared of catchment. That's 11% of Scotland feeds into hydro, and 1,150 megawatts of capacity. But the board, and why it was established, was to generate, distribute and supply electricity in the north of Scotland. But the underlying motivation was to improve the quality of life of our citizens in Scotland. Tom Johnson, the chairman of the board in 1946, said Highland depopulation did not stop at the clearances. In the first 30 years of the present century, in the 250 parishes covered by the operations of the board, there was a decrease in the population of no less than 30%, unless drastic steps are taken to market our resources, etc. I cannot see the chance of any restoration in the depopulation. Unless we do that, the future is bleak indeed. So big investment for socio-economic benefit. So Hansard, there was in 1952, they sought to increase the spend, the borrowing power of the Hydro Board. And reading Hansard, it gives a real insight into what the local MPs in the Highlands thought of that early period of development. In a debate in 1952, the MPs recounted their experience of the development of hydro, and the provision of electricity had transformed farming, increased the quantity and quality of food available, created hundreds of jobs during construction, and skilled longer-term jobs. The lives of women in particular were transformed beyond recognition. And of course, the Hydro Board created a lot of roads, created access as well. It's not just electricity. They referenced amenities and young people going as far as to talk about cinema in the Highlands for the first time. So this investment was transformational. So I'm going to take that theme a bit forward and talk about the scale of what's to come in Scotland. So the delivery of one pump storage scheme in Scotland, when it comes, will take 5 to 7 years. Will be labour intensive. DRAC's estimate Kruger 2 will create 900 jobs during the construction, and Coire Glas is even bigger, and they will run concurrently. So there's 900 at Kruger and probably more at Coire Glas. These create skilled jobs during construction, but there's a legacy both in the supply chain and locally as the operation of these hydro schemes. But there's not just two, there's 6 potential pump storage schemes coming in Scotland, all in flight at the moment. The 2 I mentioned are the ones that are closest to fruition. So you can imagine the impact of 6 such pump storage schemes in Scotland. And if go back to my discussion on hydrogen, the potential for jobs in the green hydrogen area in Scotland, lots of those skills are linked to our skills in the Aberdeen and the coastline there in terms of oil and gas. So saving those jobs, creating new jobs, coupled with pump storage development, the potential impact is significant indeed. In fact, I would go as far as to say truly transformational. So, a bit of detail. This is Coire Glas. It'll be the first large-scale pump storage scheme built in the UK for more than 40 years. It's located in the hills on the north side of the Great Glen, near Invergary. This photo is taken from the top of, for the hill walkers amongst you, Srona Coire Glas at 937 metres. It's one of the Loch Lochy Munros. And it is under the surface of this mountain the power station will be constructed. Why this site? Well, 2 large bodies of water. There's Loch Lochy, that's in Loch Ness at the back. I'll show you Loch Lochy in a minute. A big, huge volume of water, and the ability to create a reservoir high on the hill and not a very long planned distance between the new reservoir and Loch Lochy. So this is a cutaway of the hill, the mountain rather, to run you through some of the significant parts of it. There'll be a dam up here. The dam will be 90 metres high, so twice the height of the Scott Monument at the bottom of the road. Water will pass through here, through a headrace tunnel, down a vertical pressure shaft, go through the power station here, and make its way around this tail race to spill into Loch Lochy. That's in generation mode. And when reversed, when you're pumping water to get up there, it comes in from the intake structure through the turbines, reversible pumps, up here and back up to fill this loch. The other bits and pieces of tunnel are, there's a emergency access tunnel, there's ventilation tunnels, there's a ventilation shaft here, that's an extension, that's a surge shaft. So the scale of the underground development is monumental. To give you an idea, from there to there, it's a vertical head drop of 500 metres. The height of that shaft there is akin to the Burj Khalifa tower in Dubai, the pointy tower in Dubai. So the scale of the underground development is eye-watering. So 2 kilometres of vertical shafts, 67 underground openings, all tied up, will be 18 kilometres in length. 4.6 million tonnes of rock will be excavated. So truly gigantic undertaking. This is a closer look at the power station. Incidentally, these are this is not necessarily exactly what would be built. This is a kind of early stage development. This is the bottom of the pressure shaft. You can see it's blue. The water comes down here or up there, goes through the power station complex and makes its way out of the headrace. The caverns here are large enough to hold Glasgow Cathedral, and these tunnels around the top are for ventilation. And this little hammerhead blind tunnel here, I'll tell you a bit more. It's an exploration adit that is currently being constructed. So this is from Kruger, just to give you an idea of what it looks like inside the power station. This is the turbine hall. You may have been to Kruger, and it's a big tourist attraction, just to show you the scale of the development that's coming. And how do we build these things? Well, all of them will be built by a method called drill and blast. This is a high-speed railway, but it's the same technique that will be used. That's a drilling jumbo presented to the tunnel face. We drill holes in the tunnel face, charge them with explosives, fire the explosives, and go through a mining cycle of excavating the material, taking that to the surface. And as I said, there's 67 tunnels to be built in Coire Glas. And all of that waste rock will be used around the site, for some in the dam and some other parts of the site. And the geology, the tunnel walls will be supported by sprayed concrete, and everything on the wet side, where there's water, there'll be a concrete lining. So in the cavern construction, the caverns are immense, so we take them out in slices. So we'll go in at the top and take the top of the cavern out in 2 or 3 slices, small tunnels to form the cavern, and then we work down the sides or the whole of the cavern till we create the full opening. So it's a very sequential process. It's a bit, we just go in every day and do the same thing and just get faster and faster and faster at it. So the skills and techniques for the development of these tunnels is here in Scotland. We have the talent, we have the people and resources to work on these tunnel projects. Yep. So, and this is what it will look like when it's complete. We've got a dam at the top, and it's tucked away so it can't be seen from Loch Lochy, which is down here on the side. We've got the intake structure on the bottom. So the difference between pump storage and conventional hydro is we've got 2 bodies of water. We don't have to dam rivers. So it's in essence, it's a much more lower environmental footprint than conventional hydro. So, and a quick look at Kruger. So this is Kruger. There's an existing dam, if any of you hill walkers, you've walked up to Ben Kruger. So that's there. It was opened in 1965. That's the existing station there. So, and that's the yellow turbines that I showed you. Now, this is Kruger 2, and you can see Kruger 1 is about to get an enormous brother or sister here. Huge caverns. Interestingly, it will tap into the same reservoir, and it's all about getting power quicker into the grid. So Drax are pressing ahead with the procurement of this. They're actively out on the hill drilling holes, taking samples, and starting to think about how they might procure it. They've got 36 consent, so they've got the planning permission, they've got a grid connection, so they're good to go and pushing ahead at a fair pace. So going back to Coire Glas, the location of Coire Glas is on the Great Glen Fault. So the Great Glen Fault runs on land. It's from Fort William up to Inverness and on into the sea. And that's fat thumbs. So this is this is a slice through the area of the hydro scheme. So Loch Lochy is here, and there's a fault, and the fault rock, the rock in the fault zone is quite highly tectonized, so it's been broken up just by the forces that are active as this huge crustal plate has moved in the past. It's not active anymore. And the host up here, you can see the top reservoir and Loch Lochy here. These rocks are samite rocks, so they used to be metamorphic sandstones with some siltstones, etc. They've been highly tectonized, squeezed and het up, so they are quite a dense, hard, durable, strong rock formation, highly folded. And what we have to do is build the hydro scheme in here. So we need to characterize that rock. We need to understand all the nuances within the rock, or at least interpret those, so that we can, the hydro scheme can be constructed in a safe manner. So SSE have awarded 2 contracts that are currently in play, and this is an aerial photograph just to show you the scale of what's going on. Excuse me. No surprises now. So there's the reservoir, there's Loch Lochy, Loch Garry, Invergarry, Lagan. So you can see that it's a large tract of land. The hydro scheme will be in this area here. So there's 2 contracts. One is with compounds here, and this is for an exploratory a tunnel that is being built into the mountain here. And the reason we're building a tunnel now is to really have a look at the rock conditions in the area that we're going to be building the tunnel. The second is up here, and this is a site investigation contract where we're drilling holes and taking cores out to study the rock and get a better understanding of the whole picture, because we've got to piece all the knowledge together before we go into, or the contractor's going to design and construction. You can see there's a couple of heliport landings there, and we've got neighbours along the road here, and because it's such a big construction site, there's a lot of interaction with the SSE's neighbours, so there's a lot of care taken in the interaction with the neighbours. So it's not an easy place to work, and the weather's not always like this. This is right on top of the hill and shoulder of the Munro, and the site of a borehole. Everything on the hill has to be taken in by helicopter because it's such a remote place. So a huge logistical challenge, and that's not just materials, it's personnel as well, taken up onto the hillside. And the weather is not always like that, I'm told. So this is a drilling rig on this near the top of the Munro, and it's targeted at drilling a borehole down into where that complex cavern arrangement was. That borehole was finished last week, and it reached a depth of 550 metres, so just over half a kilometre. And what we do then is take out rock cores, and so this is annoying me. So we take out continuous rock cores. So from this borehole, there's half a kilometre of core. And we look at, the cores are described in very great detail, not just looking at the rock type, but they're looking at the fractures in the rock and the orientation of these fractures. We look at the borehole wall, because we've got half a kilometre of cylindrical hole in the ground. We do tests down these holes to look at the fracture frequency. We look at the stiffness of the rock in terms of its mechanical properties. And all of this is fed into a process so that we can do 2 things. One is that the power station can be designed safely, that the rock support is fit for purpose, and the other is that we can manage risk during the contract, because as you imagine, starting to mine deep under a mountain, if you don't know anything about that, placing contracts to go and build these huge caverns there's a lot of risk. So the more information we know about the rock mass conditions at depth, the better we are able to both design and mitigate risk during construction. So a huge effort goes into the boreholes. And lots of these samples are taken away and done. We do a lot of laboratory testing on them, looking at the mechanical properties. So we're treating the rock as an engineering material, and that's really what all this investigation is about. Not only are we doing drilling at the surface, at the top of the mountain, and that's in the background there, but all of the low-level surface outtakes and intakes all of that. We have to characterize the ground. So there's a huge investigation underway just to help us understand what the geology is. And at the end, we're not really interested in the rock type, whether it's a samite or a granite or whatever. What we're interested in is the mechanical properties of the rock as an engineering material. So this is the same cross-section, more in engineering terms, and the different colours, they're all semitic rocks apart from this, which is the impact of the Great Glen. But we're looking at sectioning up the whole of the mountain and saying that the different geomechanical properties in different parts of the underground space in which the power station will be constructed align itself with different types of support or construction methodologies. So that's the process that's going on at present. And a big part of this, and quite an exceptional piece, I have to say, and a brave piece and big investment from SSE, was to actually start to build a tunnel down into where we will be excavating these large caverns. So this is the site on the shores of Loch Lochy. You can see, and I'm trying to do it without flicking this thing on. So big site establishment, clearance in the forest, and the tunnel portal there with machinery. Cleared all the forest and excavated a portal area to start commencing tunnelling. Now, as tunnellers are fairly superstitious lot, so the patron saint of tunnelling is St. Barbara. So at the start of any tunnelling escapade, there's a blessing. Blessing by a priest. There's Santa Barbara there, and there's a big blessing ceremony before everyone piles in underground, because in reality it's a rather it's not as dangerous as it used to be, but it's a historical aspect that we keep going within tunnelling. So you go into tunnels, you'll always see a little Santa Barbara in the sidewall of the tunnel during construction. So this is the portal of the tunnel that is being constructed at the moment. So this morning, the tunnel length was 347.7 metres long. As we sit here now, they're preparing for another blast tonight, which will take it another 4 metres length. So it'll be 4 metres long, longer by tomorrow morning. So it's a huge investment, and the data that we collect while we're going down this tunnel is fed into the overall interpretation of the underground space. So we're looking and collecting geomechanical information, geological information. That's all fed back into a database and interpretation that feeds through to design, through to construction, and through to the the money side, the contract administration when the power station is built. And that's what it looks like. So ventilation and services, air and water pinned to the side. Sprayed concrete, and the things sticking out of the sprayed concrete are rock bolts to hold this open. I have to say that I can't think of another project, another hydro project, where the owner has spent quite this amount of money in terms of investigating the ground to really feed back into that process that I described. So this happy bunch are some of them are in the audience. Are some of the engineers and geologists that are currently working on the project, a diverse bunch, smiley bunch. So they are actively overseeing the construction of the tunnel. They're looking at all the cores, collecting all the information, and they're part of this process. So I think, do we have the opportunity to become an energy superpower? And I think undoubtedly the answer is yes. We've got the people, you saw them there. In terms of natural resources, we are over-endowed with the ability to create electricity from onshore and offshore, particularly offshore. ScotWind is looking at 17 sites that are about to come on stream, and the Scottish Government and the UK Government have ambitious plans with that. It's pointless making all that wind, unless we do the wind energy, unless we seriously do something about it, and not we all paying for it not to be generated. So there needs to be storage. There needs to be a big focus on renewable energy storage. Taken in the round with storage and the green transition and the sector coupling that I've been talking about, this quite simply is the next industrial revolution. We need policymakers to focus on setting a framework to facilitate the investment in this, because the potential for Scotland and for the UK is quite remarkable. I've highlighted that our near neighbours are actually somewhat in front of us, but they're not. We can see them, they're not that far in front. The socio-economic benefits of this scale of investment have been done and have been seen before. I've highlighted the impact on the Highlands with the investment from the hydro after the First World War, with the onset of the hydro board. So I think what we're looking at here, when we couple the unique position Scotland is in with pump storage, because we are in a unique position with that. Norway's got a lot of hydroelectricity, but very, very little pump storage. So we are leading in terms of pump storage, and we can see that there are schemes coming on stream. So taken in the round, there's an enormous potential for Scotland to become a renewable energy superstore. And it really is a requirement for sector coupling. We need policymakers to help the big investment that people are ready to make in Scotland, because it could and will be transformational for Scotland, and I think particularly for the Highlands and Islands. I think the Highlands and Islands, and it was Douglas Fraser, the BBC journalist, wrote at the weekend that he suspected that the Highlands and Islands did not quite understand what was coming down the tracks. And I think that's the scale of the potential that we have from all the stuff I've been talking. So we need to act. We need to act now before we slip further behind. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was fascinating, and I really liked the tour of the site you took us on. That was very nice. Felt like we were there. I think to kick us off, because we a little bit less time for discussion than planned, but to kick us off, I will ask you a question, and then we'll see if we can take questions in the audience. So can we do this at a pace fast enough to get ahead of the climate change, of impacts of climate change, or is there things that we could do further?
I think it depends how pessimistic you are about climate change. And I mean, it looks desperate to me. But in terms of the engineering and being able to produce this electricity, yes, we can move at pace and create. There's a willingness to do it. We've got the skills. So there's no doubt in my mind that we can really push forward on this sort of green transition from an engineering and a science perspective. Yeah. Is
there another technology that could kind of take over or be more beneficial than
I think because we're kind of on literally a burning platform, my personal view is that we should rely on technology that we know will work. You know, hydrogen is still somewhat in its infancy, but you see Denmark and the project we're on, it's a 1 gigawatt plant and they're spending $1 billion on it, so it's kind of almost there. But pump storage is 80% efficient and it's doable. We know it works.
So a last one for me, as a university professor that teaches civil engineering, you said, do we have enough of these diverse-minded people in the pipeline to help with all this, to support all this?
I honestly think the scale of what's coming, we don't have enough people, and that's not just engineers and geologists. It's just people to help the construction of these things, and we need to be investing more in apprenticeships and all sorts across the whole green transition, because the scale of it, I think, is industrial revolution scale, but quite a quick one. Yeah. So it's there to be grabbed.
Thank you very much. Have we got any? So we have a roving mic. Do you want to start us off?
Thank you very much. And thank you, Professor Sloan. That was absolutely fascinating and rather uplifting, so that was nice. You talked about policymakers needing to create conditions for investment. Could you say a little bit more about what those conditions are and whether it's just investment, or is it, you also mentioned things like apprenticeships and having the right labour conditions. So
I think it's an easy one, which is the cap and floor on the cost or the value of pump storage, and that allows the big players to actually decide. It's easier to decide in boardrooms to push ahead with the scale of the investments we're talking. So that's an easy one. If you look at, again, this is a personal opinion, if you look at hydrogen policy, wind policy, they're all kind of siloed, and there's a bit of cross-referencing between the two, and there's a kind of aspiration to do everything because, you know, so I would recommend that we focus on certain things and we look and focus in on sector coupling. Because I think the story from Denmark with these 14 public-private partnerships focusing specifically on what industry can do and what policymakers can do in parallel with industry, that coupling really seems to work. So there's the Esbjerg port comes out of that sort of thinking. So I think it's not just about policy, it's about integrating policy and the doers in industry.
Andy, what a super presentation, thank you. I'm a mechanical engineer, Tom Morris is my name. This isn't a political question, but if you look back at things like Crossrail, Channel Tunnel, high-speed rail, now the Forth Row Bridge went well recently, but the ferries are struggling. How do we get the contract strategy for delivery of these mega projects better?
As someone who spends an awful lot of time on high speed too, very, very quickly, because I could talk about this all day, the biggest difference is making sure that when you go to contract, there is a clear understanding and a maturity in the design. So before you award a contract, it's like doing your house extension. You just give me a house extension, you'll pay whatever. But if you've got really detailed plans for your house extension, you'll get a better defined price. And there's no difference between a high-speed railway and your house extension in that regard. So the level of detailed design, or the knowledge of design, identifying risks and mitigating risks at an early point in the contract is your better chance of securing an outturn cost that's within sight of where you thought it would be.
Over there, been waiting a while. Right, sorry. Wait for the mic, please. Yeah.
So thank you, Professor, for the presentation. I really enjoyed it. Thank you very much. So I worked in the climate change industry, and I used to negotiate Paris Agreement myself. Hydrogen, it has indirect impact on climate change. So when you burn hydrogen, it generates also indirectly NOx, nitric oxide, lead cause of acid rain. And also hydrogen is very corrosive about the constructions here, if there is leaks. And also we have in this world a threshold of hydrogen. If we increase, it will react with carbon and cause methane gas, which is global warming potential too. So do we have policies now in Scotland or the whole Europe that we try to mitigate these problems, or we're going to have another climate change in future with hydrogen?
No, none of that features in policy. I suspect that we're so far off in terms of how much hydrogen we're producing. We're not at that point.
It's good to think ahead, you know.
Yeah, we need to think.
You.
At the back of the room, maybe?
I'm just glad I don't have to use that clicker.
Thanks for your presentation. You mentioned like the being on a burning planet and risk mitigation. Is there any mitigation for drought in the Highlands of Scotland going forward for pumped hydro, given the recent like water scarcity in the Highlands this summer?
It is a real point, you know, that the potential impact on our standing bodies of water through drought. I think we have benefit here that the standing bodies of water which we're plugging the hydro into they're massive. So we need to take that into consideration in the design of these things, that there will be potentially fluctuations in the past, but we're, you know, there are big bodies of water that we're plugging into.
Yeah, over there. Yeah.
Thank you for a very interesting talk. You mentioned early on, I think, that the amount of energy storage that we have in Scotland at present is something like, I think you said, about 1% of what we were going to need. Now, with the developments that you've been describing, that's going to go up to 2 or 3% of it. But where is the rest of the storage going to come from?
It's something we need to keep working at. So Coire Glas will double. In the UK at the moment, we've got 24 gigawatt hours of storage. Coire Glas will add another 30 onto that. The 6, if all 6 come online, will be 120 gigawatt hours. It all depends on the trajectory of our electrification of society and just how much we need. So I think it's a difficult. How much do we actually need? Is I'm not sure, but a lot more than there is now. That the 0.1%, or it's 1%, less than 1%. That's a UK number, not just a Scotland number.
Yes, over there.
Does Cowie have any involvement in the development of ways to store hydrogen itself, potentially in geological storage facilities?
No, we haven't. We're not involved in hydrogen storage, geological hydrogen storage. We're involved in other geothermal and these sorts of things, but not hydrogen storage. But it's an interesting area.
So I'm told I can take one more question. So you've been, yeah.
Yeah, if I could tempt you into the sort of political arena. We're looking at something that I can see the great benefits for Scotland. But in global terms, are we talking about, to coin a phrase, urinating in the ocean if China and India are not reforming? And also in Scottish terms, in political will, which you did refer to, is there an element that Westminster will be reluctant to invest in massive capital schemes in Scotland with the prospect of Scottish independence?
So the money for these hydro schemes is not in no way related to they're not funded by government. They're funded by organisations who go and get money in the open market. What Westminster government, the ask of the Westminster government from First Minister and from the power companies here is about setting policy on the value of the storage. All the wind farms you see, governments facilitate those, but they don't actually spend much money themselves and invest. It's all private money. In terms of India and China, well, it's a bit sort of off beam from the talk, but I don't think it's a correct argument to say, well, if other people are behaving badly, we should do nothing. Is what I would say. So I think we should strive every sinew ourselves to decarbonise and store our electricity and make as much green electricity as we can. And if they don't like it, then there's nothing we can do about that. But we could lead by example, and I think that's what we need to do.
Yeah.
From the
Yes,
online
of course.
audience,
Yeah.
from the online audience.
We've got a question online.
Thank you. It was, what is the primary barrier to further storage schemes being developed in Scotland?
In terms of further pumped hydro schemes, I think there's 6 in various stages of development, 2 in flight. Who knows what will happen if policy is aligned and we get this cap and floor? We might see, I wouldn't say floodgates, but you know what I mean, more and more of these schemes coming online. So, for example, in Norway, they're looking at repurposing existing hydroelectric projects to convert them into pumped storage, and who knows, that may happen in Scotland as well. So that I think we're at the cusp of potentially more and more of these schemes. How many, I wouldn't know. And I think in terms of green hydrogen, it all depends on the technology and upscaling that, but it also depends on making sure that we actually build the offshore wind. Now, there's a slight existential threat to offshore wind at the moment. I don't know if you read in newspapers about Statkraft, the Swedish giant, pulling out of an investment off Norwich. They walked away and left 278 million of investment because the returns that they see now, given the inflation, etc., that's going on, that it wasn't viable to develop that offshore wind. And then Ørsted, which is a Danish giant, saw its share price tumble because of similar pressures. I don't know whether they've walked away or not, but similar pressures, let's call them, in developing offshore wind around the United States of America. So there is pressure in wind development that, again, there is an ask from the giants to have policy around how much they can sell electricity for. So there are big moving parts, but it's quite a young industry, so it's it'll be fine.
On those words, and in the interest of time, can I ask you to thank Andy again for a fascinating afternoon?
Thank you.
So Curious runs up until the 17th of September, so please check the other events on the website, rac.curious.com. You will also receive an email for evaluation on how the evening went. I'd like to apologize for the online audience for not picking up a question earlier. I'm sorry. And I would like finally to thank you for attending tonight, both in person and on the other side of the computer. So thank you very much.